Anyway, so I really appreciate the chance to talk to the community again. I'm going to roar through. Hopefully, I don't know if you guys got a chance to look at the next rules report, which is our first report, just sort of getting a lot of the themes together of some of the things we see going on in work. We never really get to talk about the future of work all that much. People care a lot about the really near future. We tend to, my friend John Hagel's phrase about zoom in, zoom out. We tend to zoom in a lot. Like we really care about, especially when we're thinking about the impact on markets. So I'm just going to roar through this really quickly, and then would love to have your questions. So, and you can see the report itself. I'm just going to distill it down to sort of some of the main insights through the report. And I'm just going to, my typical approach is speed dating with ideas. So I'm just going to run through the fire hose, and then we can run through your questions. So those of you who haven't seen me before, I'm the author of a new book called The Next Rules of Work, Care for the Future of Work with Singularity University, a consulting company, small but mighty consulting company called Charette, and a software company called eParachute, built from the work of What Colors Your Parachute, and 9 courses on LinkedIn Learning with about 1 million plus learners. So, and if you want to reach me, I'm G Bolles just about everywhere, LinkedIn, Gmail, you name it. So, all right, so here are my contentions. Is first, it's pretty clear, we've all gotten the memo, we're going through what I call a great reset of work. And here's what I mean by that, is that basically work markets, you have to think of them as flows, right? Work markets are not static. They're not commodity markets. We're humans, and we make decisions. And sometimes those decisions are predictable and understandable, and other times those decisions are kind of mystifying. Like, why is that? How'd that happen? And then because of the way that we gather statistics about work markets work, is we tend to reset them. Like we tend to go back and say, well, we got that wrong. And the U.S. government is famous for doing this. You can never trust the numbers in any particular time until they've gone through this sort of reevaluation of what they understood the markets to happen. But think of it basically, my economist friends hate it when I do this, but basically it's a circle of supply and a circle of demand. So the supply is us, messy, expensive humans, and the demand, of course, is how much compensated work there might be. And these are constantly changing dynamics. They're constantly changing sizes. There's changing demand and changing supply. And it tends to be, in the United States, it tends to be a not an extraordinarily resilient system. We have what I call an unemployment system, unlike Germany or some of the Nordics, which have an actual employment system. In the same way, we don't have a health system. We have a sickness system. We kick a lot of stuff into negative externalities, and then it's only when bad stuff happens that the system actually kicks in. And so if you're employed, it's good, but the system's not designed to keep you employed. The system is only designed to kick in when you become unemployed. So the rhetoric pre-pandemic, of course, was that the circle of demand was going to shrink because of robots and software. Along came a virus, and just biblical unemployment overnight in the United States. And then many of you have heard me say, I wrote an article about 2 years ago called The Great Reset, and predicting sort of 3 phases. We're emerging from phase 2, the uncomfortable middle. But basically your experience of it was this sort of Venn diagram of all these different elements. And so you might be in a place right now where mask mandates are gone. You've returned to whatever you think of as a relatively predictable set of market conditions, macro market conditions, or you might be in a place where you're still locked down, and the market has been extraordinarily dampened by the lack of ability for people to get together, and a lot of the activity of in-person markets. And so you're actually still experiencing this uncomfortable middle, but now we're actually all, I think, starting to envision what that phase 3 might look like. What would a pandemic world, post-pandemic world look like? So what happened to work during that period, and what can we think is going to last in work? And in the report, every single one of these are all clickable links. So I've tried to give you sources for everything. So if you're curious or interested in any of these trends, you can dig into them a little bit. But basically, I know that so many of the stories, the headlines that we've seen in the past year have been about the Great Resignation, which might not be quite so great, and a lot of the worries about market mismatches. We have to celebrate that at least the system worked well enough to get a whole bunch of people back to work. Now, it didn't work. The game of musical chairs was not effective by any means. However, it's actually we have to at least say we had this biblical unemployment and then really, really rapid return. We've never had a recession like this that has ever operated like this. But then, of course, we haven't had a global pandemic in 100 years. The other story that has been in the headlines, of course, has been telecommuting. Well, first off, the numbers around our friend John O'Dwyn calls distributed work and what people often call remote work, the numbers are fuzzy because the Department of Labor is simply not able to deal with non-binary statistics. That is, either you're working or you're not. And all this fuzziness of whether or not you're working part-time or where you're working from, its data is imperfect and always lagging. And so, but this is generally, a good guess that about a quarter of all people were, during the rapid lockdown, we had extremely high unemployment. But over time, we've had more and more people returning to something that we typically are calling hybrid work. But basically, a lot of people were working from remote for a long period of time. And certainly a lot of people on this Zoom call, that's been the characteristic of your work. If you own a restaurant, you had people who had to go in and serve food or serve in a retail environment. They didn't have the luxury of working from remote. And so we tend to overplay this a little bit, I think, in part because all of our press, the people writing for newspapers are working from remote. So as far as they're concerned, it's a massive trend. The Great Resignation was a huge set of headlines. Maybe not quite so big. I'll come back to that in just a second. But essentially, it hit. You can see those same people that couldn't work from remote. It was by far all the in-person type of job activities were the ones that experienced the greatest drop-off in employment by intention. But people also started a lot of new companies. You can see the secular trend up until 2020 was we really weren't having a lot of business starts. We really need in the range of 350 to 400,000 business starts as a country to really feel like we're creating the new companies for tomorrow. Because as you know, it's companies that are less than 5 years that are the net gain in all employment in the United States. Large companies don't typically have net gains. All new employment statistically up until the global pandemic were from companies 5 years and younger. But we also had a significant amount of retirement. Right now, the DOL, Department of Labor, is saying in the range of 2.5 million more retirements during the pandemic than you would have expected. And so that's a lot of chess pieces to take off the table. That's a lot of people that could have been working, some doing still hybrid working, but typically, you have to think of that as that's a big hole that we've left in the job market. That and others, and I'll come back to it in a second, but that and other holes have created a market gap, big market mismatch. So you're going to keep on seeing large numbers of jobs that are open. That compresses the market, so you get wages going up to some extent, not in all cases or in many cases keeping track with inflation, as Stephen was talking about. But there's no question that the billionaire class did really, really well. That's the orange bar here. Their wealth increased dramatically in the pandemic, and so there's no question this was a massive unequal recovery. There's still a significant lack in terms of number of Black workers, number of women returning to the sidelines, in part because many are in either multi-generational families and want to protect older family members, or they just, you can't find childcare, you can't have good transportation, and so you can't even get to work in the first place. So the unemployment statistics, for those of you who are fans, I often say don't even look at what's called U3, the standards unemployment statistic that's released in the press all the time. Just completely ignores millions and millions of human beings. So if you really want to understand what's going on, first off, read the JOLTS report, just Google JOLTS report. You'll understand the Venn diagram of the market a lot better. And if you really want to understand that there's a significant number of people in the United States that are underemployed, that is, they can't even make enough money to feed their families, yet they're still treated as employed. They work at a Walmart or a Kroger's, then that's actually, just look at LISA, Ludwig Institute's calculation, and it's a lot more accurate picture of the health of our employment market. So what you get is a great gap. You get these basically market mismatches, and the basic takeaway from this is that's not going away anytime soon. So what are some of the trends to be thinking about? There's still going to be significant intention, at least, for people to make their own decisions about changing jobs. If you really dig into the numbers, you realize, it's not that great a resignation. 2019, 29% of the American workforce made their own decision to leave a job. In the global pandemic, 33% decided to leave a job. So it's not that big a difference statistically, but employers are freaking out because they're not the ones in charge. What has happened in previous resets of economies, like the Great Recession, is the employers got to choose. They got to lay people off. Well, in this case, we laid a whole bunch of people off, and they didn't want to come back. So I don't blame the people. That it's because that contract is broken between the company and the individual, and that's not the same case in, say, Germany. We bumped to about 18.4% unemployment in no time, and Germany went from 5.0 to 5.7% unemployment in March of 2020. So you can design a system so it's far more resilient. But really, the battle is going to be around, as obviously, employers are trying to get workers to return. It's going to be around flexibility, flexible work, remote work. Sure is a thing, but flexible work is actually where the battle lines are going to be drawn. Now, of course, for many people, if you are given the decision to make decisions, then sure, a lot of people still want to work remote. There's guesses as to what that distributed work might look like but if a year from now we're still worrying about variants of Omicron and beyond, then you're very, very likely to see it's going to be flexibility that people are going to be looking for, and not just the ability to work remote. It's this ability to make a decision as an individual or a team member in any given week as to when, where, and how you'll work. And so what's the impact on companies right now? Well, CEOs are trying to thread the needle. Sure, we've got a bunch of companies that are saying, yeah, we're coming back, but there's this constant changing landscape of pronouncements from CEOs, and it's basically game theory. You're basically trying to satisfy both the people that want to be back at work tomorrow and the people that never want to come back to work. And so you're trying to send messages to your workforce so that people will stay with your company, and so that you won't have to go and spend a whole bunch of money trying to find their replacements. There's no question that this has changed the power dynamic with workers, but a lot of this can be temporary. Unless you look at the macro trends are pretty much pointing to you're going to still get a fair amount of power in the hands of the worker, especially for in-demand jobs. So you're going to see right now, at least, companies have reserved more money for raises this year than they have since 1998. That doesn't mean they're going to spend it, but certainly you're going to spend a lot of money into reshaping the workplace. You're going to be figuring out how you're going to be dealing with, I don't like the label hybrid work, but certainly flexible work, and that some people are going to be at a meeting and a lot of people won't be. And Cisco is saying it thinks 98% of all meetings are going to have at least one remote person. So work won't be a place that you go to. It's going to continue to be what you'll do. And the employers that are going to keep people are going to be the ones that are going to be able to provide the level of flexibility that people want. But there's a lot of people that just won't be in the job market. So what you've got is a significant trend towards having a mismatch, a gap in the workforce that we're not going to solve anytime soon. Stephen's very good about being able to talk about the macroeconomic trends. I'm not going to try to channel him here, but I am going to say there's some trends we can't avoid. One is life expectancy has dropped, especially because of opioid usage. The numbers are expected to pick up post-pandemic, but the pandemic itself has had a significant impact on our life expectancy as people. We are aging very, very rapidly. 10,000 people turning 65 every day, which is why there's a bunch of people that were in that window who could retire more rapidly. The birth rate's not going to go up anytime soon. We're not at replacement rate, and so and that's actually becoming a global trend. Which means we're just going to have fewer workers. Like we're just, it doesn't matter how good the game of musical chairs is. There just won't be enough people playing the game to be able to fill the chairs. But if you add up all the numbers, right now we're short about 2.1 million immigrants because of our policies of the past 5 years. We got those 2.4 million people that jumped into early retirement. There's about 1.5 million others that haven't returned. So we're about 5.5 to 6 million people short, and there's no quick fixes to this economically. You can't just completely reset the work market. And so what'll end up happening is, and if you look at the Venn diagrams, that sort of red zone where we can have people that there's work that no longer needs to have people doing it. We automate. That's what we do in periods like this. When you get work market mismatches, you tend to automate the jobs you can't fill. And so you're going to see a lot of those cruddy jobs that we can't get people to come back to. There's going to be a lot of pizza making robots out there in the time to come, because that's what the hirers are going to need to do. And that will impact low end wages. So you see an increase in low end wages right now, but as you automate, you tend to actually depress wages. As a matter of fact, the work of David Autor is an economist at MIT. He's got some of the best work to point to how that is true. There's also a strong trend, as you've seen with Mr. Zuckerberg and Meta, to try to move a lot of this work that we're doing into the metaverse. My position on this, if you've seen the little video I recorded. The metaverse is not a thing any more than AI is a thing. We've lumped a whole bunch of things into this one category because we think that it markets it a lot better. But it's, with so much of the attention around crypto and that sort of thing, we're sort of lumping that all into one bin and saying, oh, that's all a market opportunity. Well, back in 1993, I was the editor-in-chief of Network Computing magazine, and I shepherded this magazine. We printed it in January of '94, the Internet Gold Rush, and you'd be stunned at how many of the characteristics we talked about. But the internet was a thing, as it was big, infrastructure that everybody could kind of agree on what it was. And the metaverse is actually a significant number of different technologies and markets kind of all rolled into one. A couple of things in addition to the report that I'd issued. The job numbers, the reason that they're so, in the United States, that they're so changing is that literally in January of each year, the Department of Labor changes it. It goes back and it smooths the job statistics. So there are months like July that showed massive changes in employment, and it has actually gone back to smooth those numbers out to actually show how in different geographical markets it actually wasn't quite that dramatic. But as Larry Peters is my favorite quote of his, is an economist is an expert who will know tomorrow why the things he predicted yesterday didn't happen today. These numbers are not actually easy for you to make decisions on in terms of what's going on in the market. So I would look at LISEP, because I think they've, the Ludwig Institute, because I think they got a much better finger on the pulse of what's actually going on at any particular time. You're going to see the participation rate slowly increasing as mothers come back to work, as more and more jobs become available to less advantaged workers. But there is a geographical mismatch. We as a country are not geographically mobile, except for those who obviously took advantage of the reset of cities to move to more affordable areas. But as a trend, we as a country do not move around much geographically. So you're likely to see, depending on whose numbers you believe, more than 10% of people maybe trending towards 20. That could be maybe 25. That could be working distributed in some portion of a week. But you're going to see a lot more in-person activities. You're going to see a secular trend in the technology markets. You're going to see a whole bunch of people just jumping into the meta space. That's what happens with these kind of market shifts. Mary Meeker is fond of pointing out that they tended to have been 10-year shifts, and we're actually overdue right now for a major paradigm shift. I just don't know whether what we think of as meta is really it. I worry about tulips and other big rushes towards these things. But there's no question, one of the greatest resets of our work markets is going to be the stimulus money that's coming. Now we have hundreds of billions of dollars that is going to flood into local markets for infrastructure, and we just don't even know where the workers are going to come from. Right now, the construction industry is already behind the curve in terms of the number of, even pre-pandemic, had a market mismatch because you need a construction worker in the place where the construction is happening. And so as you see more and more of this infrastructure money get pumped into the economy, there's another $350 billion bill about competing with China. If that actually goes through the sausage making process, you're going to see really, really significant work demand for a lot of infrastructure related projects, and you simply won't have the trained workers. So I'm going to focus on not so much on the problem domain. Next month, we're going to be issuing what we call the solutions report. And so we're going to talk about how we hack these markets, work markets, to actually solve some of these really, really pressing problems, because we're going to very likely in a year from now, when we're thinking obviously that hopefully the impact of the pandemic will be much more minimized. We're still going to be dealing with really, really significant market mismatch if we don't do something pretty dramatic now in terms of training and shifting the economic dynamics of some of these work markets. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's any thoughts. You don't have to agree with a single thing I said. Your experience might be very different, but interested to hear your questions.
Gary, I have a question if I can. Larry Fink wrote an interesting letter to CEOs of companies, which part of it is the future of work in there. Did you read that? And do you have any thoughts on his recommendations or how you think that's going to change the workforce?
Well, so I'm a big fan of Mr. Fink's pronouncements around things like economic impact and inclusive economies and that sort of thing. I don't know that in all cases his portfolio actually always reflects the statements that he's making in public. So, but it's wonderful that he's setting these goals. I would say I don't know if I believe that he has his finger on the pulse for the way a lot of the decision making works, but where if he can influence the perception that you just basically as an organization, you are going to have to increase your investments in training and in compensation. Where his statements support those contentions, then I'm all for it. Where it supports the way the work markets work often, which is that you have massively shareholder driven decision making that does not have shareholders that are saying, oh, and we also care about the societal impact of the decisions that you're making. I don't know that you're going to get any better results. You look at a Kroger's where there is a significant mismatch in terms of the compensation for their workers, and the fact that those workers a significant portion of those workers can't afford the food that they're actually handing to customers. And so if you don't change some of that dynamic, I don't know how you get some of these mismatches to actually be fixed, because you're just not going to get people making enough money to be able to pay for the services in society that they need. And so you're going to get this spiral up and a spiral down. You get a spiral up by all the in-demand jobs. There's going to be lots of AI programmers going to make a lot more. You saw Amazon basically bumped the top level pay for workers in their company significantly so that they could hire and retain the in-demand workers, but you've seen a spiral to the bottom with hourly workers. 40% of all the workers in the United States work for hourly wages, and sure, there was a slight bump, but it's not enough in most cases to make up for inflation. And if inflation continues on its current path, then that actually will be another mismatch in the market where people are going to get farther and farther behind. And there's no stimulus money in the wings waiting to be able to bail them out.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Hi, Gary. I wanted to ask you about automation. This is Zach here.
Yeah.
I remember a couple of years ago, there were reports by Bain and McKinsey and like the consulting firms about, this decade being driven by automation and like 25% of jobs being automated away. And I think they projected some unemployment rates. I'm curious, like, what's the current state of that? Because I think with COVID and the whole remote work dynamics, people are like not tracking it or not thinking of it like in the headline. So I'm curious, since you're in this future of work, focus, what's the latest data on that?
Yeah, so, and World Economic Forum has a bunch of global numbers. So there again was this projection. I showed that picture of basically automation shrinking the demand circle. And what we're seeing is actually you got to move the robot to the other side of the equation. That is, it's for the lower paid work that you're going to see a lot of the automation is going to fill in. Now there's really good research from David Autor that I highly recommend, that shows how when an actual robot, like a real robot goes into a factory, there's actually, in the range of 1.7 jobs lost. And so there's a very linear connection when you automate, specifically in productivity oriented environments, like in manufacturing. So there's no question that's going to impact a lot of jobs. What is different is that the predictions in the past worked off of a prediction of a static job market. That is, that essentially the matching of a market was going to continue to be biased towards the employer, and therefore the worker. Those of you who've seen my work before, but my contention is that robots and software don't take jobs. Robots and software just automate tasks. It's a human's decision if a job goes away. And what we're going to see is, in a lot of cases, employers are going to make different decisions if they were going to automate this work, and those people are going to be unemployed, but they've got all this demand over here, and they're going to say, wait a minute, I'm going to have to throw a lot more money at training to get these workers over here than I did in the past. And that's not something that employers have done in the past. They have actually underinvested significantly in worker training. And so what the issue is not so much that automation is going to erode all these jobs, or that there's going to be all this unfilled demand. It's that if humans could, we could all do the matrix thing where suddenly, I know jujitsu. If we could suddenly learn an entirely new field overnight, we could fill all that demand. But that's not the way it works. We take time to learn, and we need have incentives to learn and so on to go do those. So as long as employers instead say, wait a minute, I'm not just going to keep on doing this treadmill thing. I'm going to keep training people here while they're still viable and help them to learn the new work. You're never going to get that mismatch. That's the way that Germany's economy under the Hartz reforms, that's the way its economy functions much more like that. And so we just need that. We don't need an unemployment system. We need an employment system. We need to design a system where, as we're automating, we are continually training, making a massive ongoing investment that never stops, and helping humans to continually be able to solve those new problems. And then you don't get market mismatches. You get geographical mismatches, but you can solve some of that with remote work and others by basically doing a whole bunch of incentives for workers to be able to relocate. So those numbers are all going to get reset. That's the answer. Short answer.
Gary,
exactly.
how about a system where workers get some control over the means in the system of production? How about that? What do you think?
That sounds really familiar.
Where have we heard about a system like that before?
Okay, so in my book, Next Rules of Work, I show a table. And we don't want to think of this as being solely transactional, but the truth is a hirer has money and has problems to be solved, and a worker wants money and can solve problems. And so that's a table. And so we've had a really unbalanced table when it comes to work markets in this country for a pretty significant time. We have a biblical drop in whatever you want to call collective representation, collective voice, all that sort of thing. But we often call unions. Don't have to look like traditional unions. There's a lot of ways you could have collective ownership, collective bargaining, collective action, collective voice. But basically, that's a table. And when you start to get these massive market mismatches, well, the table starts to rebalance itself. It has to, because you've got to hand more power to workers because you got to pay them better and you've got to listen to what they want. If you're an employer and you're not listening to your workers telling you that they don't feel safe going back to the office yet, you're going to lose those workers because there's just more work opportunity for them. And so that's the end. You're right, Lauren. That's normally what should happen in markets like this. The problem is that's not the way the U.S. work market is really functioning right now.
Yeah, but once again, if you think of it as a binary system, I like you talking about the table. How about just a whole new paradigm? And what I tell people is I'm not interested in creating jobs. Yeah. I'm interested in creating wealth, right? Yeah. Because then people have real control and real destiny over their lives, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
and of course, based upon what you're saying, you got to know why I'm concerned about all this, because you talk about that downward spiral or the downward end.
Yep.
Unfortunately, guess what? A disproportionate number of the people that are going to be on that downward spiral, guess who they're going to look like? Guys like look like me, right?
Absolutely.
And we should talk about why that happened. Wait a minute. Lauren, we should talk about why that happens. And I don't think we're talking about education, right? The story starts when the kids are like 1 and 2, right? Or maybe even at birth and before, right? The story doesn't start when
my mom owned a daycare center for 30
unqualified.
Yeah, you're right, Jillian. Yeah, you're right, Jillian. So no, exactly right. And so that's why when I talk about the solutions domain, and I don't know if Mark's going to invite me back, but I'll send you guys the report, make sure it's available to you. You have to hit them high and in low. If we just focused on the work market the way it works today, then we're screwing ourselves in 25 years. So you've got to hit early childhood education all the way through to keeping older workers in the workforce and everything in between.
Right. And you have a point there as well, Gary. If we continue to look at education in the same way we've looked at it before, which is nominally creating what the British society had put together more than 150 years ago, right? Creating cogs in the wheel that could be moved around the world. It was the first, if you will, military industrial machine. You could take a human and stick them anywhere and they knew their ciphers. We continue to educate that way. And if we don't change that, right, we continue to have humans who go through their childhood, get out of a high school, and are still completely unqualified either for the military industrial machine of the British 150 years ago, or more importantly, for the future of work. They don't read, they don't write, they can't put together a proper sentence, and it is not their fault.
And as a country that is, and as a country that is disinvested in the trades,
correct,
which are in many cases can be six-figure jobs, we're actually blinding our children to future opportunity.
Correct. Right. We're teaching them, how should I say, the teachers themselves are folks who are not engaged in either the future or the present, right? Yeah. It becomes a vicious, awful cycle rather than a virtuous one. But more importantly, we need to look at the connection between business now and business in the future, as well as how they connect with education itself. Right. There are a few programs, very few, in which, for example, right here in the Seattle area where I'm based, there's a Bellevue College, right? It put together a kind of an outside of, not postgraduate, but outside of the college educational program for people to retool themselves. And they worked with the local companies in the area, from massive ones like Microsoft to mid-sized ones like the one I was running at the time and others. And they said, what do you need? Will you hire them if we teach them? What do you want us to teach them? Will you come help us create the curriculum? All of that sort of thing. And we actually put people from our company into the education system and said, go teach that class, right? That's how you make sure that there is that connection at the higher end. We've got to make sure that connection is there when that child is 5 and 6. And we have no such plan in place. I'm thinking that's the massive gap, and we're going to face the same conversation in 10 years.
Jillian, can you come join our Education 3.0? Actually, you too, of course, Gary. That's one of the next ones coming up that we want to.
What time is it?
It's on deck. We haven't set up a time, so we're just trying to get.
I'd be happy to, but I should point out that I'm no expert in this field. I'm a venture capitalist, and for being a venture capitalist, I'm pretty down on VC. I do things in a very different way, different investment models, all of that stuff. All I know is that we keep missing this connection here, and we of course don't address it even in VC. I'm happy to join that event.
Great. Other questions, comments?
Could you just highlight some of the comparisons globally? Because you did hit on that earlier in the presentation, but it's all relative right now. We're all experiencing COVID in different ways, but we are all economies experiencing COVID and responding to it.
Yeah.
And you also, and we've been looking at a very different socialist structure in China for a couple of decades now, based on a very different population structure. And so when it comes to the amount of people working and who is working and how that creates value and how we look at a global landscape, are conversations looking into what this could potentially cost and what that cost could be as we're losing workforce compared to economies that have a pretty well baked in built workforce that will continue to contribute differently than what we've created here?
Oh, thanks, Benny. So the short answer is, yeah, there are some estimates about what the skills mismatch. That's a lot of the sort of arena my company is focused on, Sharat. There are estimates of $3 to $7 trillion worth of economic benefit that doesn't get created if you don't get workers trained to go do the work that's needed. That is, can't even automate an awful lot of that work, and therefore you will not get the economic benefit if you don't do that. That's on a global basis, $3 to $7 trillion. So what's happening in different local markets is some countries are getting very aggressive about the training that's needed to be able to get that skill set. If you look at Singapore, small but heavily controlled economy, their Skills Future program is designed to exactly do this. They force the major industries to collude within themselves to determine what their future skills needs are going to be, and then they tell the colleges, this is what you're going to train for. And so they've synchronized that process in their markets much more effectively. Now it's a small economy, much harder to do with big economies, but you can look at what China has done to move a whole bunch of people out of race fields and into cities as an example of how you can create market signals that show this is where the demand is going to be, and then the entire system, including the education system, is all calibrated around trying to help people to be able to identify those market signals. So, but there are less designed economies. The reason I point to Germany so much is that the Hartz reforms were a set of decisions Germany made in the late 1990s about how it wanted its economy to function. And they just didn't want to be buffeted by these economic winds again. They didn't want to have the impact that they had from previous recessions. And so, they actually are far more insulated against these winds. Now, it doesn't mean they're in all cases going to have the skill set, the front edge of the demand curve. They're not going to have all the AI programmers that they need, but they're going to have a lot more of the workers that they need to fill in the rest of the gaps in the work economy. And the U.S. won't. We're going to have, you're going to be a construction company in San Francisco that can't hire, but the one in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho can, because you've got the workers that are going through much more of the trade vocational training that will be available or that will move there, as opposed to very, very expensive cities where their dollar won't go as far.
And then add to that aging population, obviously, and all these developed economies are a little bit that, and all other economies are much younger in terms of age, and then that brings migration as well, and how we deal as economies with migration from these countries.
Right, exactly. So there are some things, and we talk about the solutions domain maybe next month, but basically, and then I apologize, folks, I'm going to have to run. But you can try to convince an older worker who is retired or semi-retired to come back and do a little more work. So that's, as an economy, that's one of your easy moving levers. It is not an easy moving lever to suddenly kick in immigration again. It's not in this country. It's not going to be easy from a rhetoric standpoint, but it's also not going to be easy from a mechanical standpoint, because you have very specific skills that you're going to need in specific geographical areas. And if you suddenly just open the spigot of immigration again, which is not going to happen, but if you suddenly opened it again, you would want to have an efficient mechanism that those people would go where the work is. We didn't do that with the Afghan refugees. We didn't put them in the places where we needed, where we did the inventory of their skills and said, oh, you're trained as a doctor, we need you in Des Moines. We didn't say that. We sent them to places where they either had family or where we had housing, and that was kind of it. And so as an economy, when you get these mismatches, they're not easily reset. It took us, depending upon the local economy, 8 or 9 years from the Great Recession to be able to actually have the local economy start to sing again. And then there's some economies that are still reeling. We're still reeling from that got hit by the global pandemic. So these aren't easily solved problems. But from a macro standpoint, yes, you've got to encourage more older workers to stay working, and you've got to increase immigration. It's the only way to make the numbers to meet the big need of these big numbers.
Gary, we do have an easier way to do that than the government's allowed us to do with the H-1B visas, and we cap ours 85,000. Canada lets in about 400,000 with a country 1/10 the population. So we have a lot we can do that would solve a lot of the issues quickly if we chose to.
Yes, and remember that H-1B has a lot of frictions around it. Yes, we can, but there's a H-1B is not a magic wand. Like, you can get a bunch of workers into that process, but it's a really bureaucratic process that can take a year and a half, 2 years to work through. So
it's not a Swiss watch, but it is a solution.
It is a solution, absolutely. Yeah, it's one of the levers we can pull.
I mean, Gary, wouldn't you have? I can imagine, okay, getting people to move, or and bringing people in the country and selling them in the New York area or LA is one thing, but can you really convince immigrants to move to like Decatur, Illinois?
If there is the combination of work demand and some part of community that they're connected to. So that's typically what the statistics show. Anyway, I apologize, folks. I'm gonna have to hop, but
before you leave, I'm going to turn the baton over to you, Denise, because this is also your bailiwick, and you and I have been talking. Maybe you could reflect on what Gary's been saying, and
that'd be awesome to do. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
And then secondly, tell them what the kind of session you're going to lead. But first, reflect on Gary, if you could.
Okay.
Thank you, Gary.
Denise, I'm going to hand you the baton. So, and you're going to do a better job than I did. All right. Take care.
And the thing is, you should know Denise is a runner, so this is the right analogy. And she's hosting our second annual run walk, which we're going to put the night before, or the day before, or the morning of, where we end up having this big Jeff Ruby Columbus dinner, which spills over into into the morning. So you're going to lead us there as well. And we're having a soccer game, a pickleball game this Sunday morning and a soccer game Saturday afternoon. It's Denison alumni, men and women, against the 361 community. And the Denison coach is running that, and Denison tennis coach is running the pickleball. So just you're ready.
Well, Mark, I've got a new strategy this year to really up participation in the 5K. I'm going to start my smack talking now in mid-February, so that by the time June comes around, you can't not show your face.
That's right. I'm looking on other trails, so that's good.
I'm looking at you, Stephen Burke.
There's a million ways we can get hurt. Mark just laid out 5 of them, so we can just pick our poison and figure out which way we want to, get the muscle aches going.
So a couple of quick introduction. Gary does phenomenal work because he really has a real skill in distilling massive macro shifts to very simple ways of thinking about it and absorbing it and relating it to your work. So what I do then is almost like a subset of Gary. Me and my team focus very specifically in the niche of operationalizing hybrid work within large companies. And just very simply, the outlook on that is that in our point, it is an operational risk to do two things: not implement hybrid in your models. And the second operational risk is to do it poorly. It's a very different way of thinking and a way of approaching work that requires a different set of skills and programming and a system within the company, entirely achievable, but it is a learned skill for individual people, the teams, managers, or leaders. And I'm just gonna, what I'm hoping to do, or what I suggested to Mark, is me and my team run a particular strategy session that allows people to get a real holistic point of view on understanding what hybrid really is from all the dimensions that it means in a simple 1 hour session. I've had a lot of strong impact and feedback from people that I've run that with. They have really been able to get a hold of what looks like mass confusion, but to us is simply the evolution of work into the modern age by considering this dynamics of a framework that we built. So what I suggested to Mark is, for those interested in the community, we could run that 1 hour session virtually at some point in the future for anyone that's interested in really, really biting into what hybrid is, in terms of also all the low-hanging fruit and all the generation of impact that it has. But our primary focus is how to do it, what to consider when you're doing it, and how to do it well to drive performance and bottom lines.
And you're doing it for major companies. Go ahead, Tim.
Is there a difference between hybrid work and cross-training on jobs?
Well, hybrid work is about making a decision about flexibility, about empowering and allowing people to choose when and where they work in a culture of trust. So that is a changing dimension of location and time. Cross-functional training of jobs could be considered an aspect of that, but it wouldn't be a pure play tangent of it.
Okay, got that. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm excited for that kind of a session. Alan, you came on screen. Did you want to say something?
No, it's a great presentation today. I just wanted to thank you for putting this together. It's a great group of individuals, and thank you, Mark, for arranging this, and also the content today. I wrote an article about 2010, so going on 11 years ago, about this great reset on the demographic shift. And it's one thing to write about it and the other to live through it. So it's always a great reminder about what is happening in our workforce today, and that we're in the middle of a paradigm shift right now, living through it. So it's all good.
Fair enough. And I love your microphone. We are going to be in the West Coast. We're trying to figure that out. So we're going to take you up on your offer.
Perfect. Yeah. Love that. Love that.
Dot. To
Let us know when you get here.
I'm saying dot to introduce me to Steph Curry. But
oh yeah, I had dinner with him and Clay the other day, and there's also some other people I want to bring in from Michigan.
Good.
Michigan alumni when you come back. So
beautiful.